Greetings, everyone. Time for another one of my walking vlogs. Today I said I would redo my rule of law video. It's never been posted, you didn't miss it. I recorded a couple days ago one for rule of law, and found that it was just really rambling, so I thought I'd redo it, try to be a little more focused this time. The rule of law is a concept that we are a society based on laws, and not rather than other things like mob rule, might makes right. We are based on a strict legal stricture. At least that's the goal. And because of this, at least the way we are treated by the government should be somewhat universal. It's very important when you think about the rule of law that you need to function as though it were you need to function as though, you need to act as though the rule of law is true. Rule of law is the basic assumption that most people will follow rule of law. In fact, a good sign that a law is a bad one is that most people don't listen to it. I like to say very regularly, if a law is not worth enforcing, or it's a law that cannot be enforced, then it's not a law worth having on the books. For instance, this is going to be a controversial one. Helmet laws, not helmet laws, motorcycles have a tendency to do a move that I like to call skimming. But this is the move where a motorcycle or other two-wheeled vehicle, instead of sticking to a lane of traffic, gets between the two lanes and goes ahead when you suffer in regions of high traffic, or frankly because it's at the back of a long line of people parked at a stoplight, and they want to be at the front. And you can see this in a lot of different areas. Why do I say that's not a law that should be a law? A lot of people say that should be illegal. California took another stance and said it's explicitly not illegal. And here's what it basically came down to. There's no way to police that action, because the situations in which a motorcyclist weaves between the lanes and runs down the center strip to dodge traffic, unless you're a motorcycle cop, you're not going to be able to stop him. So enforcement becomes or you're not going to be able to keep up with him. And so enforcement becomes impossible. So it's already a useless law. So, there's no way to enforce it. So it's really hard to say, to make someone obey it. And then you have California's approach, which is to say, rather than outlaw it and not expect it, we are instead going to explicitly allow it. Why? Because we can't stop the behavior, so instead we're going to make that behavior expected, so that hopefully there are less accidents involved with this dangerous behavior. Because that's why you're making a law against it, is because it's dangerous behavior, and drivers aren't expecting it, and cars can hit these people making this move without expecting it because they're not expecting someone to be there. So in California, they said, no, we're going to make it so drivers think about the fact that it's actually going to happen, and hopefully reduce, by stating that it's explicitly allowed, they hope that the goal of what banning it would be, which is to reduce the danger of that activity, to reduce the number of casualties incurred by that activity, by hopefully reducing the likelihood of being hit. I actually think this is a good thing. And as much as to understand why, you need to kind of understand my legal theory. That is to say, why laws exist, what should be a law, what shouldn't be a law. My legal theory goes like this. Every person in the world has the right to self-determinate. That means every person in the world has the right to live their life as they are able and see fit. The only time the government should get involved in that right is when that right conflicts with someone else's right to live their life as they wish. What is the core concept there is that the reason laws should exist is to deal with the conflict of two people's decisions on how they want to live their life. Without laws, you have things like mob rule, where the will of the many outweighs the will of the one. And their judgment can be capricious and subject to the whim of one person who's very good at manipulating the mob. So you want to avoid mob rule. And you could argue that democracy is really just a formalized mob rule, but and to a degree that's true. But the strictures of democracy and the legal system that we are founded on, you'll note that mob rule is about not just playing the lawmaker, but the judge, jury, executioner. In mob rule, you're not just setting the laws, the mob is enforcing those laws. And how the mob sets the laws can change very rapidly when you're dealing with a mob. So there's no way to know what the law is, and once you've angered the mob makes the decision as to your life. This is a bad thing. We also have another scenario that's very common without strong legal stricture is might makes right. That is to say, the strong are promoted at the expense of the weak. You can see this in small children. A small child, prior to learning about the needs of sharing, can very often uh, take the approach that that I want it now, so it's mine. And if the other child cannot uh, contradict that decision, uh, he will lose out. Specifically, think toys. The bigger kid takes the toy of the littler kid, and this is seen as by the bigger kid as the right way to do things. It's mine now. We have to teach that child that society expects something better of that child, something known as sharing, and the concept of ownership, where that child who has that toy, if that's his toy, you have to ask him for permission to use that toy. These are societal laws, are societal concepts to prevent mob rule and might makes right rule. And laws are a different way of handling those situations. Laws, instead of saying that laws apply to everyone and they're designed to create an equitable resolution of a conflict between the right of one person to self-determinate and the right of another person to self-determinate. Now, there are some very obvious ones. The majority of the Ten Commandments can be seen as very clear things where we have set up a societal structure that says a societal structure that most people would agree to, if you take a little bit of liberty with with some of the more sexist ones. You take a little bit of liberty to get to the underlying theory behind them, and even the more sexist ones can be very can provide a very good foundation for the concept of dealing with these interactions. You don't steal. You don't kill. Yeah, it's just there's this idea that you can see throughout history that the laws that first crop up are twofold. There are the laws that are designed to prevent one person from interfering in another person's right to self-determinate, and then there are the laws designed to give the person making the laws power in the olden days. And America, at least on the books, when it started off, got a lot of those laws that just put someone in power right, in that they didn't have them. I'm sure there were some, and I'm sure there are some more have crept in over time. In fact, I know more have crept in over time. But as it stood initially, it was actually a pretty good theoretical concept. So, understanding my legal theory, going back to why I think, you'll note that I feel that, despite the fact that it risks the motorcyclist takes when he rides the middle lane or the divider, and those risks have societal cost. But the best way to mitigate those risks and those societal costs is actually to accept the behavior. Um, if the point of the law is to avoid personal or societal cost, um, it is to help mitigate personal and societal costs when when two or more people interact. Um, then the best way to handle a motorcyclist riding the middle lane is to acknowledge that it happens and make the other people in the risk equation, the drivers of cars, more aware that it's a possibility. Um, you can see this in riding a bike or a motorcycle in general is incredibly risky. Um, and only recently has the law really developed to or have courts really started recognizing in just about every state bicyclists have the right to the road, but a lot of the times the failure of an automobile driver to adhere to or to anticipate their presence on the road has not been led to liability on the automotive owner's part. That's changing. Bicyclists, you need to do your part too. I see you all the time using the road but not obeying the rules of the road, and I cannot anticipate what you are going to do if you are going to ignore stop signs, red lights, right of ways. I can't anticipate what you're going to do if you're going to ignore all these rules of the road. Sorry, small pet peeve of mine. But you can see the prevalence of automotive over bicyclists quite clearly in the law, in legal decisions over the years. And that is a shame. Hopefully that is changing. That said, you need to. There are other laws that we have that are similarly seem to be only personal, but do bear a societal cost that we place. So we place a burden on an individual. For instance, helmet laws are a good example. Generally, people who have a full head helmet, proper, modern, technologically sound helmet, are a lot more likely to survive accidents. I grant nothing's going to save you if you go head first into concrete at 60 miles an hour. But contrast, if you do survive, you're more likely to survive. Your survival is far more likely wearing that solid helmet. And if you're wearing that helmet, you have a good chance of recovery, which means you will go back to society, you will pay the debt that you incur, that you will likely incur in hospital bills, and can proceed forward. Whereas if you die at the scene, there's a whole lot of salary getting spent on your smear. And there's a very real societal cost there. And honestly, we try to protect societal cost. we're trying to minimize societal costs. Um, and while I recognize this is probably probably comes pretty close to an exception to my rule, um, seatbelt and helmet laws uh, exist to reduce a societal cost that is seen and that is easily reduced by the wearing of helmets and seatbelts. It's a minimal cost compared to the investment you're making into the vehicle, and it's good for us all. Now, there are other laws, however, that exist that refer to societal cost that I do not think are valid. And one of them, quite clearly, I'm going to tell you quite clearly, is the current ban on marijuana. Now, marijuana was originally banned, and a lot of people will tell you at length how marijuana was actually banned as part of a ban on hemp to protect the paper and textile industries. And I'm not gonna debate the actual origin and sinister reasonings behind marijuana banning. What I can tell you is that when it was taken to Congress to add marijuana to the banned substances list, I think it's classifying it as a Schedule 1 drug. It's either Schedule 1 or Schedule 3. You can never remember which is which. This banned substance, it was actually the people who brought it to Congress recommended that it be banned until such time as further testing could be done on the effects of marijuana. And the fact is that research never happened. It got banned, and then the research to justify the ban, to justify the continuation of that ban, never happened. As we can see, statistics are showing that a large number of Americans who are productive, hardworking Americans use marijuana. I'm not saying it's a majority, I'm just saying there's a large number, a statistically significant number. Their addictions are no worse than what we see with cigarettes or alcohol. And yes, alcohol can ruin someone's life. And yet if the threshold for banning something is that the fact that the addiction to it might, in some cases, ruin someone's life, then there are a lot of things we should ban, and we should probably start with alcohol. It is not significant enough to remain on the ban list. It also shows significant benefit for many people suffering from pain that is difficult to manage, people who have low appetites. I'm going to tell you right now, every side effect of smoking marijuana is like the perfect answer to chemotherapy. It gets rid of your pain. It makes you hungry. It has generally an elative effect on on most patients. I'm going to tell you, in the past, I have smoked marijuana. I suffer from chronic pain. I found the absence of pain to be quite refreshing. Other side effects of marijuana I did not enjoy. I do not expect I would ever, in the normal course of things, partake again, even were it made legal. But it's very, marijuana, what I've heard about it, the reasons I've heard we should ban it, I don't think statistically pan out to be true. We need to actually run solid scientific studies. I'm a big proponent of fact-based lawmaking. What does this mean? I mean laws based not in conjecture, not that we found correlation, but laws based in solid science and findings of causation. This is possible. The problem is now to do research, you have to be in, you have to get permission from an agency whose entire existence right now is to prevent the use of marijuana. Well, I guess it's to prevent the use of drugs, but marijuana is one of the top substances and it's top money maker, and that agency, you now need to get permission to prove that marijuana isn't as dangerous as they say. That's getting into the drawbacks of the rule of law, and I need to kind of back up a second here and talk about the meaning of the rule, not the meaning of the rule of law, but the positives to the rule of law. Here in America, we have a robust series of rights enshrined in the amendments to the Constitution, the first 10 of which are known as the Bill of Rights. And these rights are only secure so long as, in general, everyone agrees to respect them. The positives of the rule of law is that we should all get these rights. And that means when you are falsely accused, you get these rights. Now, one of the things that I regularly hear on a blog that I follow in the comments is people saying such and such was quite clearly guilty. The adherence to the rights is great and all, but such and such is clearly guilty, and the fact that this was overturned was a travesty. I'm going to use one case in example in particular, where the fact that they were guilty actually wasn't in doubt by the time the trial happened. And that is a case in which a state patrolman, can't remember which state, pulled over a couple in a car. Now, if you don't know, there are a lot of... this officer decided that the woman was a little too shifty, and she was a little too fidgety, too nervous. And so he asked the woman to step out of the car and noticed that her purse had a scale in it. It would look like a small scale. Based on these two pieces of information, he decided he had probable cause for a warrantless search of the woman's purse, at which point he found drugs. This is why I'm saying by the time they reached court, the guilt wasn't really in question. However, the appellate court found that there was no probable cause. This is a very interesting concept in the law. We all have a Fourth Amendment right to be secure in our persons and papers. And this broad right against searches and seizures is a right that gives us the ability to prevent the cops from just searching us willy-nilly. Your police state benefactor will tell you that it'd be really beneficial. This is a really useful tool for law enforcement. This is generally referred. This is brought up again and again in terms to digital surveillance being performed by the government. It's like the counter argument is, yeah, I'm sure it'd be really useful for law enforcement to at any time be able to come in and search our home. But that's not what the law says. You need probable cause. Normally, you need enough probable cause for a judge to grant you a warrant. If you have sufficient probable cause, you can commit a search on the spot and have a judge sign off on your search in post. This is called an extingent circumstances. However, this is actually a very limited. Extended circumstances are supposed to be very limited. And here the trial court ruled that being nervous while dealing with police and having a digital scale are not probable cause. I actually experienced similar problems in a hobby that me and a friend of mine share. Well, it's really him. I share it, but I'm nowhere near enough into it to actually occupy that, and that is home chemistry. Home chemistry used to be the kind of thing that kids would do. I've read plenty of books with the idea of a home chemistry set in them. A little play chemistry set. These chemistry sets used to be a common thing. Nowadays, not so much. So if you have any scientific glassware, you are immediately under suspicion of making drugs. This is a big problem. It's actually one of my biggest pet peeves. The mere presence of this glassware does not constitute probable cause, and I had to explain that to an officer one time. Thankfully, I encountered a very, very understanding police officer who, probably his eyes glazed over when I started talking about the types of stuff we would actually do with said laboratory glass. Yeah. I was transporting laboratory glass and got pulled over by a cop. There you go. No, it's a general problem, and the appellate judge said, "Look, Just having a digital scale isn't enough. There's plenty of valid reasons to have a digital scale. This woman could be very closely monitoring her food intake. That is a legitimate reason to have a digital scale. Your digital scale, hell, Alton Brown recommends that every kitchen in America have a small digital scale. Perhaps she was needing to do cooking elsewhere, and she was going somewhere to cook and wanted to make sure she had a scale for the proper measuring of ingredients. Remember, cooking is chemistry. So the opinion of the judge is you're reasonably going to be nervous when you encounter police, and it's reasonable to have a digital scale on you. Plenty of people who've had gastric bypass in the past and have lost the weight will continue to keep that scale because they continue to need to track their intake. Hell, there was a short time there I considered getting one and weighing, so I could weigh the amount of Soylent I consume when I'm making single servings. I just decided to ditch that, buy a second pitcher, and make whole bags, but it was there for a second. Now, the law protects everyone, and it's actually very, very important under the rule of law that you allow the law to protect everyone. Yes, there are people who are guilty who are let free because the law applies to them. But that is very important because the law also requires that you be given those rights, that the law actually apply to you, and those same things that got that guy off on a technicality are what could keep you out of jail on trumped up charges. We see this quite regularly, and it's very important that these things be tracked. Now, there is, however, some downsides to the rule of law. One of the primary ones is that one of the primary downsides to the rule of law is that sometimes people do bad things go free because it can't be proven. As I just said, we have to allow for that. We have to allow that people who you can't prove did something bad go free because we more want to make sure that no innocent person goes to jail than for every criminal to be caught. And that's the trade-off. Either, some people might try to say this is a false dichotomy, but it's not. You either have a system which catches all the criminals and because of that overcatches innocent people, because the rough evidence that only kind of proves that guilty person is guilty also proves that an innocent man only kinda is guilty. And so if you catch the bad guy, you're going to catch the good guy. Or you try to make sure that as many innocent people as possible go free. In which case, poor evidence is sometimes going to happen, and you're sometimes going to get no conviction, where a conviction might in reality be if all the facts were known, a conviction was actually warranted. Um, and that's just a trade-off you have to deal with. Um, but there are bigger problems with the rule of law, with the way the rule of law is handled in this country. Notably, some laws only apply to people of certain race or certain economic status. You can see this quite notably. There have been tales in certain areas that a cop knew a particular neighborhood that was predominantly upper-class white people was rolling in drugs. How do you know this? This is the information he's getting from the people he's catching. Or perhaps perhaps he's seen enough. I don't know. But you get situations where a cop will tell you that he knows a certain upper-class white neighborhood is rolling in drugs. But they're told enforcement efforts are supposed to focus around the low class and colored areas of town, and we've had a number of news reports to that degree come out of areas with high rates of police violence. And you see that there's definitely, statistically, it is quite clear that enforcement is focused on people who can't fight the law, and people who don't have a better status in life. The people who can fight the law and glad hand all the people, there's definitely a tend not to get targeted, and it's because of that very fact. We have an entire system that has dodged the concept of justice. We've recently built a system. I mean, it's probably systemic in some areas, but changes that have happened relatively recently have pushed a system where convictions matter more and high-profile convictions matter more than justice. In part because our Attorney General is elected, he needs to have popular support, which means the Attorney General has to do his best to make sure the well-off in his community see him positively. And the way that works, you can probably figure out. There are several positions that are elected that, while in one hand you can understand why they're elected, have really set up a perverse system of a perverse system in our justice where convictions and appearances matter more than the actual justice being done. And so that is a problem with the way rule of law is handled here in America. As well, judges are very recalcitrant to to hold judges and lawyers and, to a degree, cops responsible for their actions. I'm going to first handle lawyers and judges. Lawyers all lawyers all handle are this type of stuff I've seen lawyers sanctioned for, and complete monetary sanctions, sometimes really minuscule amounts, are things I would get locked up, criminal contempt for, if I was the one committing them. You see some pushback. Judge Otis Wright has been making some major pushback in the and the appellate court in that district, in his district, have made major pushbacks against the concept of copyright trolling, and actually holding the trolls responsible for their actions in court, which were horribly despicable. If you want to look it up, look up the saga of Prenda Law, and be prepared to spend a weekend doing research. It's a long, drawn-out legal history, sanctions across the country, and they've now humorously asked for criminal contempt proceedings. Ken White of Popat says that he has never seen a lawyer walk onto the stand and say, "Your Honor, I want my clients to face criminal contempt proceedings rather than pay an extra $80,000 in punitive damages. We want to put them in a situation where they could go to jail for life." It was a really radical decision. So there are places where they're pushing back, but it's not happening. Judges and lawyers get away with stuff that we wouldn't even believe. You can extend this to the powerful in politicians and in politicians. Numerous NSA officials have leaked information about the identities of informants, as well as of spies, as well as ways and means of collecting information. These are the things that Snowden is being called a traitor for. But because a NSA official did it to make the government look good, they're not being prosecuted. This is called prosecutorial discretion. The Department of Justice has discretion of what cases it's going to go after. And it decides that certain cases don't have the value of others. And the cases that they go after, invariably, a case with similar with similar states across the board, if it's a powerful official making the government look good, he won't be prosecuted. If it's a low-level employee who made the government look bad, he'll definitely be prosecuted. And that's just the fact. This prosecutorial discretion, it comes out of rule of law, and unfortunately has grown to become abused in this country. So, police, and that comes to police officers. I know I have many people I know who believe, who will constantly state that police officers are normally good, and that we shouldn't look to the bad apples in policing as a target of the whole. And to a degree, they're correct. Just as we shouldn't hold. Unfortunately, most of those friends are also very quick to jump on a bandwagon, say attacking protesters, some of whom are committing a riot. They'll attack the entire police protest based on the actions of a few and say that no, they're just asking for all the violence that they suffer, and this proves it. Let me try to nip that all in the bud right now. Cops have a dangerous job. They have a very, very dangerous job. I support them 100%. But here's the fact. If you go into an encounter with a cop, assuming you're talking to a good cop and you've got a bad cop, your life is going to be hell. If, on the other hand, you go into but if you flip this around, if you get into a situation with a cop where you assume you've got a bad cop, and what you actually have is a good cop, then nothing's going to happen. You are going to assert your rights and refuse to let this cop be a bad cop, and if he's a good cop, he lets you and you go on your way. There's an article I read recently about reasonable suspicion. I brought this up earlier. One of the biggest problems with the police is, let me dodge the problem with the police for a second. One of the problems with the Fourth Amendment is that it is applied retroactively, meaning the Fourth Amendment in general isn't applied by the cop. The cop's goal is to get the evidence, and in general, there are a number of examples of cops willing to ignore the Fourth Amendment, and you only get the protection of the Fourth Amendment at trial, or sometimes even you have to wait till the appellate court to finally get your Fourth Amendment concerns addressed. And because of this, the police do have a tendency to assert a stance of reasonable suspicion that is very overbroad. Case in point, the application of reasonable suspicion in my earlier example. There are actually several state or city police forces that have policies that are directly in conflict about reasonable suspicion, that are directly conflicting with judicial decisions in court, and that is just something that is a problem. The main problem with the police comes in twofold. One is the belief that despite the fact that they have a very, very dangerous job, their goal should be to get home. That isn't to say I want a cop to die. But there's a problem when someone signs up for a job where you are potentially shot at, and you are told by by your senior officer that your duty is to get home safely. Your duty is to obey the law. That's why in many areas, a police officer is considered a middle class job that will actually that you can actually a small family can actually live off of in many regions. You can actually live off a single income of a cop in many regions, and the reason for that expense as a police that we put into our police officers is because they have a very dangerous job. And that job is not to get home safely. That job is to uphold the law. Now, so a cop has the belief that, so a cop who feels in danger, and a very vague danger, will jump to shooting. Some cops will also will take the slightest movement as an aggressive gesture. Again, this isn't all cops, but there are a number of cops who this is what's happening. This is reality. This is how they operate, and you have to address the underlying problem. One is this idea that their job is to come home safely. The next problem, and far more insidious, is the idea that when they commit a crime, who pays? Who pays damages when a civil suit is brought against the actions of an officer? I'll tell you, the person who pays is you, the taxpayer. A cop, I have not, cops in general are not held fiscally responsible for disobeying the law. And I'm talking flagrantly. We're talking about situations where a court is awarding people millions of dollars for wrongful deaths. When a court is holding is giving people millions of dollars because 30 years of their life was taken away, because a cop was planting evidence. These isn't all cops, but the fact is the bad ones aren't being punished. What is the first response to the discovery that a cop may have committed a crime? Let's say he shot someone. Well, the first day is we're going to give him 3 days and unlimited access to any video evidence we have to get his story straight before we officially interview him about the crime. Let me tell you, if I shot someone, how long do you think it would take before the police are interviewing me? Then, even when we get the person to, even once we have, even when we have definitive proof that the cop acted capriciously, it's very hard to hold them accountable in any situation. If you heard about the recent grand jury, I can't remember who the victim was, and this is really killing me. But there was a recent case where a police officer shooting of an unarmed suspect went to grand jury. That grand jury took 2 weeks of evidence and took hours of deliberation before deciding not to indict the police officer. Now you have to understand, a grand jury is not a jury in the standard sense. They are not actually deciding whether or not someone is guilty. A grand jury proceeding, a normal grand jury proceeding, is a quick 10-minute affair where the evidence against the defendant is presented. No rebuttals, no positive evidence, just the evidence that would be presented at trial to support the charge, and the grand jury is supposed to decide whether or not they should indict them. They should bring whether or not charges should be brought. Instead, this 2-week grand jury trial introduced evidence on both sides, introduced witnesses, which never happens, and took 8 hours to deliberate. Now, let me tell you, grand juries are notable for delivering verdicts 1 every 2 minutes. That is how fast a normal grand jury indictment takes. 2 minutes. 1 every 2 minutes. The amount of evidence presented, including video evidence clearly showing the crime occurring, was met on the other side with a number of unrelated evidentiary pieces that couldn't have been known to the cop at the time, character references, just things that you don't bring into a indictment. It's been said by trained prosecutors, experienced prosecutors have said it felt like that prosecutor was advocating for the defense. This is what cops get. I don't get that. You don't get that. A cop gets that. Because a cop is a special person who is above the law. And that is the core problem with the rule of law as it currently exists in the United States. When I was in Vegas, I'm going to admit, at the time, well, let me start over. I had a moped. I spent $325, and I bought myself a 50cc moped. Technically, it's 49.6 cc. That technicality is important, though, because while you can round it to 50 cc and say that it is a 50 cc moped, it is a 49.6 cc moped, and therefore, by law, does not have to be registered. Does not need a license, does not need insurance in Nevada. Well, it doesn't need a license, it just needs a normal license. It doesn't need a specific motorcycle license. So I was riding that around. I didn't realize my license was expired. I thought I obviously missed a payment, made a late payment one time to the court, and so I got hit with a failure to appear, and my license was suspended. Didn't realize that was happening. And I got pulled over by a cop on the suspicion that my bike was stolen. Apparently, there are a few things that I didn't know. For instance, the VIN on my car is a riveted plate right inside my windshield. One of the places my VIN is on my car is a riveted plate right inside my windshield. Apparently, however, a riveted plate is not how is supposedly not how they put VIN numbers on scooters. And apparently they put VIN number. Apparently that VIN is supposed to be etched into the center column. This is what I'm being told. The steering column. Secondly, apparently there is a title associated with this moped. I found this ridiculous, as I told the cop. I paid more from my Xbox. And why did I think I would need to register this thing? But he claims that there was a lot of theft, and then this thing was stolen. There were a couple other things that indicated that it might have been stolen. I didn't realize that, but that is apparently what they indicated. And so the cop uh, pulled me over, got all the stuff, and arrested me for driving without a license. I had to go pay a partial fine, or get someone else to pay a partial fine for me. I didn't have any money on me at the time. And then after that fine was paid, go to I needed to get that Western Union to me right away. And then after the fine was paid, I was like, okay. And then they'll check and see that my bike wasn't stolen because I purchased it, and I'll get it back. Well, no, it was forfeit because it is connected. It was suspected in connection with a crime, and so it was seized by asset forfeiture. And so I did not at all anymore have a means of transportation. It was stolen. It was legally stolen from me by the police. Nothing was sent to me about an asset forfeiture case. It just happened. I found out about it months later. I found out I was finally able to get a hold of someone and find out the result of that legal theft months later. And that's where it comes in. The cops are the law has been twisted in such a way that the rule of law has been twisted in such a way that we have lost agency in the law, and so the rule of law can have a big problem. Asset forfeiture collects, supposedly used as an effective tool against the drug trade. Of course, the large majority of people getting assets seized are people from out of state who are carrying sums of money on their person. Yeah. If you're going to travel, all evidence suggests you should be carrying cash. If you're going to travel a long distance, you should carry a lot of cash. Why? Because you might end up in a spot, stranded in an area where you cannot connect to, where you can't use a credit card to pay for something. There are the credit card terminal is down at that middle of nowhere road stop where you're getting gas. How are you going to pay for gas? You need to have cash on you. But that cash is also a sign that you are carrying drugs and therefore will be seized because you were a drug runner. If this makes no sense to you, congratulations. You are 90% of America. The other 10% being law enforcement. Rule of law has some big holes. Basically, the amendments, the Bill of Rights, which should protect us from actions like this, has been suppressed in favor of the drug war. If you remember my First Amendment video, I talked about how we should resist further exemptions to the First Amendment because every exception every time someone tries to carve out another narrow exception, they try not. It's generally lopping big chunks of the First Amendment off. I might not have said it in those words. It was certainly what I was feeling at the time. We need to protect the First Amendment from further encroachment, and in the same way, we have allowed, and in the same degree, we have allowed the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments to be repeatedly undermined under the three grand fears. Drugs. Well, let me rephrase this. Under the three great panics. Maybe there are only two. Yeah, there really only there are three kind of in general. There are two big ones: for the children and terrorism, and then drugs is kind of minor third. Really, it's becoming that way, but it's terrorism, for the kids, and drugs. They're the three great fears that any legislator will play in our minds to accept the reduction of our rights. And anytime you should hear that, you should say no, because the rule of law says we're all equal under the law. We should not abandon certain rights to fight pedophiles. It's suspected pedophiles. We should not abandon our rights because there may be a terrorist. We should not abandon our rights because drugs are horrible. These are things we should not do. Instead, what we should do is allow our rights to protect those people as much as they protect you or I. Because only by protecting those people whose suspected actions are horrendous can we sleep at night. Because these people whose actions are horrendous, if true, could be falsely accused. Just whenever you have someone say, this is a useful tool for law enforcement, just remember, it would be a very useful tool for law enforcement if we required all our houses to be made of a transparent material so cops could see what's happening inside our doors at all times. We don't do that. Why? Because we believe in liberty. And we believe that our liberty is more important than making it harder, easier for law enforcement to do their job. Their job isn't supposed to be easy. There are supposed to be roadblocks in what law enforcement experiences, because that is how we protect ourselves from government overreach. Think about these things. As always, if there's a topic you want me to cover, please discuss it in the comments. Ciao.